My name is Colleen Johnson. I'm the practice director with ImagineX Consulting. We focus on modern methods of lean and agile practices, lean engineering, and security. We're based in Denver, Colorado. Can I see a quick show of hands? Who was here last year? In Miami. I guess not here. In Miami last year. Okay. Last year, I came and I presented a case study for some work that I did with ReadyTalk. And you saw a board that looked a lot like this. And I was really proud of this story. So I want to circle back here and share what happened after last year. So this board, what we did at ReadyTalk was we really were trying to implement a lot of lean startup practices into our enterprise Kanban system. And that's what this picture is of. We had this discovery board upstream that was our Kanban system to run experiments and vet these ideas before we committed to them and before we pulled them into the enterprise system. And then we also had this learn column over here. So part of our define process, these were epic level cards, part of our definition process here was to figure out what does success mean. So once we launch these features and they're in production, how do we know that we've been successful? And a lot of this was metrics around usage and adoption. It was a lot of counts and trying to figure out, once we launch this thing into production, how do we know that it's been successful? So every month we had a meeting and we would pull all the cards down out of that learn column and we had all the business stakeholders in a room and we would go through and review all of those cards and say, for this new feature we launched, how much usage is it getting? And it looked like this. And everyone would say, is that good? Is that bad? What does that number mean? So we were collecting a lot of data, but we weren't really using it. We didn't know what to do with it. It wasn't really helping us. It wasn't guiding any decision making for us. So what we really needed to focus on was how to tie that data back into our roadmap and back into our decision making process. And for us, are there any 90s hip hop fans in the crowd? I was really excited to put a black sheep quote into my presentation. For us, this was about choices, right? So we had a very binary backlog, a binary roadmap where it was, if we get good data, then we're going to do this thing next. If we get good usage, this is the next feature we're going to build. But we weren't really building options. We weren't really creating choices, and we weren't really using that data to decide what to do next. So what we're going to talk about is a couple pieces that I think you can use to create a way of tying that data that you're getting from your releases and from your deployments back into your roadmap and back into your upstream process to create options and then decide with data. So we're going to talk about three pieces of this: options, space, and speed. The core here is that every metric, we talk a lot right now about vanity metrics and data is big, right? Data is big business right now. But really, every metric could be considered a vanity metric if you're not using it to make a decision or to drive behavior. So what we're going to go through is these three steps of option, space, and speed, and talk about how you can use the data you're collecting to create more confidence in your roadmap and more confidence in what you're committing to as a business. So for creating options, so there's a caveat here. We're going to start with how we're going to create these options, but what's important here is that I'm going to assume that these options are vetted. You've run your experiments, you know that there's a problem worth solving already. So I'm not going to talk about running good experiments for a change. It's usually what I talk about. This dotted line here is our commitment point. So if this is our board of our enterprise system or our portfolio management system, everything to the left of this dotted line is considered an option at this point. We haven't committed to any of this. These are all things that we're weighing and trying to decide if we're going to do them. But now what we want to do is figure out how do we tie those options to data so that we're committing with more confidence. So I'm going to use a very simple example here of a shopping cart. So I think it's something we can all relate to. So let's pretend this orange card over here on the right is our shopping cart. We've just launched a shopping cart feature. So these other cards are other features, maybe related to different parts of the system or of a commerce site. But we have some cards over here that are also orange that are also tied to our shopping cart. Let's say one of them is related to Google Pay. So we know a lot of people have Google Pay, but how do we know if we want to implement that feature? So we're going to tie that feature to data we're collecting on the shopping cart, and we're going to say, if 80% of the users who check out have a Gmail address, then we'll add Google Payment to the checkout. But we're not going to commit to building that feature and move it past that commit line until we know that a lot of people have that need. Another option might be gift wrap, right? So there's probably a lot of people with Amazon Prime. You know, you can Amazon Prime your gifts to everybody and have it gift wrapped. But maybe that's a pretty expensive thing to have people actually wrapping all your shipments, right? So we might say we're gonna only add the option to gift wrap something if 50% of the users who check out have ask for a gift receipt. So we're starting to tie all of these options we have upstream to data we're collecting over here. And it's not to say, maybe gift wrap, we know people want to do gift wrap, and you might go out back here in your experiments and survey a ton of people and find out everyone says they love gift wrap. It's a great option. But it only matters if we get the data back that people are sending gifts. So we're tying those options now back to data we're collecting. Another example might be donating the remainder of a gift card. So if I have an option to pay with a gift card and at the end it says, you have $2 left on your gift card you didn't spend, would you like to donate it? That's a super cool feature, right? We should tell Amazon. That only matters if people are paying with gift cards. So it could be a cool feature to add. People might say, I would always donate my $2. I would always donate $2 off my gift card. That's all great feedback over here, but it doesn't matter if nobody's paying with a gift card. So we're going to tie that back to the metric of collecting how many people are actually paying with a gift card. So all of this is trying to create a connection between the data we're collecting and the options that we have upstream. So we're not committing to anything until we have the data that tells us to move forward. I like this quote. I'll give you guys a second. this line. I think what's funny about this is we all have a bias, and we all have, you don't realize that you have a bias until maybe you flip the coin or until maybe you get the answer you don't want. I think what we see a lot with organizations in the roadmap planning process and in prioritization is that bias comes through, whether it's intentional or not. And we're all going to be lobbying for features we love or ideas that we think are great, and this is a really important way of removing that bias from your process so that what you're committing to is data-driven. Okay, so the next part of this that's super important is space. Has anybody read any of Ash Mayura's work? So he talks about this in his books. All of this is great in theory, as long as you have time to respond. So we want to create slack between these features so you have a minute to get that data back and decide what to do with it. If your features are stuck too close together, you'll never have a chance to use the data to drive that decision making. Got a delay. I spent some time in South America, in Chile, and they call a traffic jam in Chile a taco, which I don't know why, but I thought it was cool. So I'm going to call this a feature taco. So if we use that example we just had, where all of our orange cards are related to the shopping cart, I think there's definitely a push right now to bundle those together, right? We're going to focus all of our energy on getting all these shopping cart features out all at once, and we want gift wrap and donate the rest of my gift card and Google Pay. So we're going to bunch these together so we can do a big marketing push. But this tendency to bundle these features together means that we're not getting any information out of the stuff we're releasing to make decisions. So I'm going to call this a feature taco, because feature traffic jam didn't sound as cool. So we want to create space, and that means that you might have to stagger and decouple a lot of the features that you would normally bundle together so you can get that feedback and then use that data to make decisions. And everyone loves space. Everyone loves their space. Okay. So what do we do with this? What does this mean for all of us? I think the important part here now is how do you iterate quickly? And how do we tie this back to what we do as Kanban practitioners? And the important part here is that we focus on short cycle times and quick feedback loops. So you can gather data, you can create a bunch of options upstream, and you can leave yourself a bunch of space. But if it takes you a year to get that data back and then decide what to do with it, you're probably too late. So our goal here now is to really use our Kanban system and use the tools and the practices that we have as practitioners to shorten that cycle time and get that feedback really quickly so that we can respond and make those decisions from a data perspective. And this is just illustrating the same board we just looked at, but if it takes, if this cycle for an orange card to move all the way from the left to the right takes that long, that's all time that we're not getting products out and getting our customers satisfied. So our goal here is to really shorten this entire feedback loop so it's as quick as possible and that we're making those features small and iterating quickly. I think Ricky Bobby said it best, right? So our goal with all of this, just to circle back, is that we're going to use data. We're going to create options and tie all of those options to everything that moves past that commitment line. Does anybody, can we do a show of hands, who uses the commitment line with their work? I think it's a fairly interesting concept from a business perspective. I don't think a lot of organizations are super familiar with that concept. And I really like it because it makes a very distinct and conscious effort of what you're moving past that line once you clarify where that point is for your business. And being able to say, like, this is our commitment line, everything we're moving past this, the clock is starting, we're tracking it, we're investing money in it. Having a process like this where you're using that data to decide what's moving over that line just makes that a very concrete process and a concrete decision and commitment. And then the space, so we're creating options, we're tying all of those options to the data, and then we're going to leave space between each of those features so we have time to incorporate what we're learning from our production environment and from our production usage back to what's moving past that commitment line. And speed. So short cycle times, quick feedback loops. How do we get all of that stuff back into the pipeline quickly so that we're making decisions as fast as possible? Any questions on this? We're going really fast.
What's a typical amount of space?
I think it depends on your cycle time so if this is an epic level or a feature level or initiative level, it's going to depend on your cycle time there. I like to have a cycle, one full average cycle between each feature. So if this is an epic level board, and the epics for us take 2 weeks. I like to have a 2-week gap before we're considering what's going to get pulled into that next cycle. And I think that even feels fast, right? I think that's a pretty short timeline. So I think you have to adjust, but I think that's probably the minimum is 1 cycle. What's that? Other work. So I think let's back up here a little bit. So what we're trying to create with this space here is, and this is where the colors of these cards are kind of linking features together. So orange might be shopping cart, blue might be new products, gray might be technical debt. we're creating space here by saying we're gonna, and maybe this is development or this is development. I don't think the columns necessarily dictate your, the amount of space you're allocating, but you're giving yourself an opportunity here to let this card sit and get that data back while you're working on other things before you decide what you're gonna pull next. And I think it's kind of counter to the whole, we focus a lot on MVP and we focus a lot on how many features we can get out and how fast can we bundle, you know, MVP out to our customers and get feedback on value, customer value, and are they happy? And a lot of times that does mean bundling things together, but I think we do that and we end up with feature bloat. Even with an MVP type of process, you end up with more stuff in there than you probably need. And it doesn't mean that you don't, you know, it doesn't mean that you haven't run experiments on this part. These might all be vetted ideas and be great things that your customers have said that they wanted. But if you're not tying them to the data over here, you're probably adding things that you don't need. Or that your usage isn't telling you or driving that decision to commit to it.
Are you trying to create space so there's room to collect the data and get some insight, or are you trying to get the teams out of into kind of the feature creation frenzy, or is it both?
I would say the first part. So it's the space to collect the data and focus on other things. And I think it's, it's decoupling things, but then also decoupling them in a way where you're switching gears so that you're not stopping work necessarily, but you're switching to something else so you can get that data back to make a decision. Like with this example, I think this could be, let's say this blue card, let's say blue's our tech debt work. And the white might be new features that we're adding or new products that we're gonna sell through a commerce site. Maybe gray is account management features. So you might launch something from the shopping cart and let it sit while we're waiting to see which shopping cart feature we're gonna add next, and then switching over to tech debt and new products. But the key there is just giving yourself enough room. And you might be doing definition on some of these or pulling some of these in from a product definition standpoint, but the key is to not start on development, or I would say not even pulling them over the commit line until you've got that data to drive that decision. Clicker's not keeping up. Well, and I think the goal with all of this is, I think there is a push right now for big data and data-driven decision-making and gathering all these metrics, and it can be very easy to get caught up in collecting a ton of metrics, gathering all this data because there's great tools and there's cool software and there's a lot of awesome stuff right now around data collection. But if we're not using it in a way that's helping us drive our backlog and drive our product commitments, then there's probably no reason to collect that data. And I think usage, you see that a lot with usage and adoption. I think I've got this stuck. Any other questions while we see if I can get the clicker to catch up? Yeah.
Hi, so the question is, what happens in a scenario, do you have an idea of what would happen in a scenario if someone was pushing to say, from a stakeholder perspective, I want that option executed sooner? Someone has to say, okay, well, we're going to try and do it a little sooner, prematurely, ahead of the data that you collect. Is there any way to associate some kind of risk with that? Have you looked at that?
I haven't personally, but I think that that's a great way to leverage this process, is to be able to say that there's a risk attached to committing to that work without having that data back. And, I think there's a lot of different metrics you could probably gather off of that. We looked at discard rate a lot in kind of leading up to this process of how many things were moving past the commit line that weren't making it all the way across the board. And initially we had a super high discard rate because I think the commit line was very loose. We didn't have a great process. We weren't tying things back to what the data was telling us, but things are moving past that commit line. And then we would start through design or through even into definition and getting into story breakdown, and then not work on those features. And I think if you can track that and say, we have an average of 20% of our epics get discarded, and look how much time we're spending on average on those things that are discarded. So let's say, it's in there for 2 weeks in define and in definition, or in discover and in definition. That's all work that's kind of getting thrown away. So I think if you can tie that back to how much work you're putting into that stuff that's not making it all the way across the board, that's a great metric to be able to show. I think there was somebody over here with a question. Anybody else?
I can get you to use the mic, it's very helpful.
Sorry.
Hi. So I was wondering if you've ever looked at, instead of time boxing the space, looking at running it until you get enough stats, like just enough population size?
Until you get the metric back that you want? Or-
No. Well, that would be cool. No, I mean until you get a population size that's large enough for you to run some statistics on it. So maybe it takes you a month to get your data, or maybe it's really fast, you get it in 3 days or whatever.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it totally depends on what the metric is you're gathering, I think, for that case. Like, I think for some things, if it's a population size, like some of those examples we had to say, I think most of the examples I actually have up here are more date-driven, time box-driven. So you might say after a month, let's see if 50% of the users have Google Pay. But you could absolutely do a population size and measure it that way. I think it just depends on what metric you're gathering. Yeah. So our goal with all of this is to avoid this, right? That room of blank stares. I think one of the coolest parts about this whole process is that same group of people that met once a month to go through and look at all of this data that was coming in was the same group that met once a month to do roadmap steering, not in the same meeting. And what was really fascinating about this was we had the roadmap steering meeting where we would say, customers said this, and they want this, and we think they need this, and this one client's really upset. We have all these things we need to add. And then we had this other meeting once a month where we reviewed all this data from production and new features that we launched. And it was like, hey, wait a minute. So we were able to pull both of these things together into one meeting where we were creating an opportunity to use that data to drive that decision making. And I think it was a great aha moment to say, we have all this data, maybe we need to collect different data and link that back to the stuff that's in our roadmap and that's upstream, so that when we pull those options from the backlog and from from our queue of available things to work on, we're moving them past that commit line. We're doing that with data and more confidence that we're committing to the right work. That's all I've got for you guys. Do you have any other questions? Went through that really fast. Yeah. I'll get you the mic.
I really like the objectivity of how it works. I'm kind of curious when I think about trying to take that back to my organization. There's going to be more than 1 or 2 or 3 features that we're prioritizing. Is there another mechanism to, I guess, scale? I mean, if we have 50 stories that we're getting feedback on, how do you choose which one is next?
So for the organization I was working with on this project, it was at an epic level. So it wasn't a story level, it was kind of a level up, and that board was our enterprise system. So each of those cards kind of represented a collection of stories underneath it. And that made it a little bit easier, but it was also not a huge organization either. So I think it's going to depend on the size of your company and how you track your work. That analog board that we had at the beginning, the picture of the index cards, was the first. Well, we'd gone through multiple passes of our enterprise Kanban system, but we ended up with all of it in Jira, which was great because we were able to put metrics and attach things into the Jira epics. And really keep tabs on things that were released and we were still gathering data on, and we had all of that in that system, so that helped too.
So could you, you said you had these 2 meetings and they became 1 meeting, and can you just talk maybe a little bit around the feedback loops and the cadences in terms of and what you called them and who came and that kind of stuff and how it changed?
Yeah, let me go back. I want to go back to that initial board here. See if I can really stump the clicker. So we called the meeting where we reviewed the data, the Learn meeting. Really clever. Because that was, it's like the first slide. Give me a second. It was the name of the column. So things sat in that column until they got reviewed in that meeting. And often we would decide to leave things there. So we would review them. This meeting was scheduled once a month. We would review everything in that Learn column. And a lot of times we would put things back in there if we needed to come back to it a month later. I don't think it was a super scientific process. It was usually like, that metric isn't what we want it to say. Let's track it for another month and see if it goes up. So it wasn't the best system. But we called that the Learn meeting. And so we would just pull everything. I saw it. We would pull everything out of that column. There we go. So this was our enterprise system. We had define, develop, launch, and learn. We would pull all these cards out of Learn and then review all those metrics once a month. The product owners were responsible for defining the success criteria over here, what that metric was. But like I said, it was very rooted in usage and adoption metrics. And there were, I mean, it took us over a year, I think, to finally stop having that conversation where we would say, we had 30 new downloads of this. And everyone would be like, out of what? Like, what does that mean? Is that good? Is it bad? I don't know what to do with that number. And I think even, we had the product owners really focused upstream on connecting those numbers and saying, if we have 50 people download this, we consider it a success, which is good. That was a huge step forward. And for us, and when I stood up here last year and shared this journey, that felt like a win. It felt like a huge success to be able to say, we're defining our metrics here and we're tracking them here. But what we were really missing was the way to connect all of that into one big loop and say, what are we going to do with this data that's going to help us drive the decision making over here? No, we actually called it roadmap steering. So the Learn meeting went away. Roadmap steering just became the meeting because really that's what we were doing. We were deciding what we were going to commit to and what was going to be the next work. We were just doing it with the data out of that column. Yeah, so it just became steering. Any other questions? Otherwise, you guys have a lot of ice cream to eat. All right, thanks everybody.